In 1942, a Soviet reconnaissance unit vanished in the Hindu Kush mountains. Official records say, destroyed by German forces. A single survivor said something else entirely. World War II is the most documented conflict in human history. Hundreds of thousands of declassified files, millions of personal testimonies. Every battle, every atrocity, written down, filed, preserved. So what does it mean when something can't be explained? What does it mean when trained soldiers, men who had stared down tanks, artillery, death itself, refused to write in their official reports what they had actually seen? Today, we follow the trail of one of the strangest and most unsettling mysteries of the Second World War. A mystery buried inside Soviet intelligence archives for 50 years. A mystery that has no clean answer. This is the story of Unit 317, the Hindu Kush, and what they found there in the winter of 1942. By the autumn of 1942, the Eastern Front was consuming the Soviet Union whole. Stalingrad was burning. Entire divisions were being swallowed by mud and German steel. Stalin's armies were desperate. For men, for intelligence, for any advantage they could find. The war in the Caucasus had opened up a brutal second theater. Germany's Army Group A was pushing south toward the oil fields of Baku. Control of the Caucasus Mountains meant control of Soviet fuel, and potentially the war itself. It was in this context that a small, elite NKVD reconnaissance unit was quietly assembled in Tashkent. Their designation, Unit 317. Their mission was deceptively simple on paper. Cross into the Hindu Kush mountain range along the Afghan border, locate and assess German observation posts rumored to be assisting local insurgents, and return within 3 weeks. 12 men went in as. 1 came back. And what that man reported would be classified, denied, and buried until 1991. The unit was commanded by Senior Lieutenant Alexei Voronov, 31 years old, a veteran of the Winter War against Finland. His second-in-command was Sergeant Dmitry Platonov, a former geologist who knew Central Asian terrain better than anyone in the regiment. The men were hand-picked, experienced, hard. These were not conscripts pulled from a factory floor. These were the Soviet Union's finest mountain fighters. They departed on October 14, 1942. The last confirmed sighting of the full unit was at a border post near Ishkashim, in northern Afghanistan. A local border guard noted in a logbook, which still exists, that 12 Soviet soldiers passed through heading east. He described them as, quote, well-armed and purposeful. He also noted, in a small aside, that his dogs refused to stop barking the entire time the soldiers were present. He could not explain why. 3 weeks passed. No radio contact. No return. A search team was dispatched in November. They found the unit's final camp, tents still standing, equipment abandoned, food half-eaten, a fire burned out. No bodies, no signs of combat, no bullet casings, no blood, just footprints in the snow, leading away from the camp and into the higher elevations. And something else. Scratched into the metal side of a radio transmitter, apparently with a knife, were 3 words in Russian. It lives above. The search team reported this. Then, apparently on orders, they did not report it again. Private First Class Nikolai Belov was found 17 days after the search team reached the abandoned camp. He was discovered by Afghan shepherds at an altitude of approximately 4,200 meters, suffering from severe frostbite, dehydration, and what the eventual medical report described as acute psychological trauma of undetermined origin. He was 22 years old. According to the shepherds, he was curled in a crevice in the rock, clutching his rifle, whispering repeatedly into the stone. They couldn't understand Russian. But one of them, a man named Kasim, whose grandson would later speak to a Russian journalist in 2003, remembered the sounds. He imitated them for his family for decades afterward. Phonetically, it translated as, "Don't move, don't move. It watches when you move." Belov was transported to a Soviet military hospital in Dushanbe. His frostbite was severe enough that 2 fingers on his left hand were amputated. His psychological state was described by the attending physician, a Dr. Yuri Semashko, as beyond anything I have encountered in 3 years of wartime medicine. He would not sleep. He faced every wall he was placed near. He refused to turn his back to any door or window. He spoke in short, fractured sentences, often stopping mid-thought to listen to sounds only he could hear. For 6 days, he said almost nothing coherent. On the 7th day, an NKVD interrogator arrived. His name has been redacted from every surviving document. What we have is a partial transcript of that interrogation, leaked to a Russian investigative journalist named Galina Petrova in 1994, and later authenticated by 2 independent archivists. I'm going to play you portions of that transcript now.
Tell me what happened to the unit.
They're gone.
Where did they go?
Up, it took them up.
What took them? German forces?
No Germans, we found the German post, it was empty. They were gone too. The walls were broken inward from the outside. The walls were stone, 2 feet thick.
What broke the walls?
We didn't know at first. Platonov said it was avalanche damage. Voronov said we should keep moving, so we kept moving.
When did you first see it?
No, wait. The first time was the smell. 3 days after the German post. We smelled something like wet fur and, I don't know, old meat. Voronov said it was a predator. A bear, maybe. He told us to make noise when we walked, to scare it off. We did. It didn't matter.
What did you see?
The second night, Sokolov was on watch. He woke us all up screaming. By the time we got out of our tents, he had stopped screaming. He was just standing there, pointing up at the ridge above us, and there was a shape, very large, standing upright. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. It was standing the way a man stands. But it wasn't a man.
How large?
Taller than any man I have seen. Much taller. It was, Voronov said, at least 3 meters, maybe more. It was dark, but there was moon. We could see the outline. It didn't move for a long time. It just watched us.
What happened next?
Voronov ordered us not to fire. He said, and I remember exactly, he said, "Don't provoke it." Which was strange, because he had never said that before, about anything. But something about the way it stood there, something about the way it looked at us, you know.
How do you know it looked at you?
You know when something is looking at you. We all knew.
The transcript continues for another 11 pages. I won't play all of it, but I want to share the section that has haunted researchers who have studied this document. It is the section that describes the 3rd night.
What happened on the 3rd night?
It came into the camp.
Armed men did not stop it?
We shot at it many times. Voronov, Platonov, Fedorov, Chechin, all firing, full magazines. It made sounds when we shot it. Sounds like... I don't want to describe the sounds.
Describe the sounds.
Like a person crying. But also not like that, like something that had heard people crying and was imitating it. It wasn't afraid, it wasn't even angry, it was just walking, moving through the camp like we weren't even worth being angry at, like we were something small.
Did the bullets wound it?
I don't know, I saw it bleeding. There was blood on the snow, black in the moonlight, but it kept moving. It took Fedorov first, then Chechin. I hid under the supply packs. I know what that means about my courage. I know, but I hid and I watched, and it kept coming back. For 3 nights, it kept coming back.
Coming back for the men?
Not for the man. For the man, it had to search. For Voronov, it had to search the whole second night. I heard him. I heard him for a long time. No, it kept coming back for me. I don't know why. I don't know why it didn't take me. Every night it came back and it stood outside where I was hiding, and it smelled me. I know it smelled me. I was right there. But it didn't take me. I don't know why.
What did it look like in detail?
Like something God made before he decided what people should look like, and then changed his mind, but forgot to destroy the first draft.
Before we continue, I want an honest answer in the comments. Do you believe Belov? Not do you believe in Yeti? That's a different question. I'm asking specifically, do you believe that this man, in that interrogation room in 1942, was telling the truth? Because those are not the same thing. And how you answer that will say a lot about how you hear the rest of this story. Subscribe if you're new. And let's go back to 1942. Nikolai Belov was discharged from military service in early 1943 on medical grounds. He was assigned a small apartment in Novosibirsk, given a modest pension, and told, very clearly, to say nothing about what had happened in the mountains. He complied. For 43 years, he said nothing. He reportedly refused to ever look at a map of Central Asia again. He worked in a factory. He never married. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, and completely unwilling to be near windows at night. He died in 1989, 2 years before the document that bears his name was ever made public. He never knew that people would one day believe him. Now, let's talk about what we actually know. Because this story, as extraordinary as it is, does not exist in a vacuum. The Hindu Kush mountain range, spanning modern Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, is one of the most remote and least explored mountain systems on Earth. Portions of it still have not been fully mapped. The terrain is extreme. Deep valleys, sheer ridgelines, permanent glaciers. In winter, entire regions become effectively inaccessible. It also sits at the geographic heart of one of the world's longest-running traditions of large, unidentified bipedal creatures. In the Islamic and Persian traditions of Central Asia, the creature is called the ghul, or sometimes the dev, a massive, hairy humanoid that lives in the high mountains and is known to be territorial, nocturnal, and extraordinarily dangerous. These are not fringe folk stories. They appear in texts going back over 1,000 years. Alexander the Great's historians reportedly described similar encounters during his campaigns through these mountains in 327 BC. Marco Polo's journals reference wild men in the ranges between Persia and China. The Soviet Union, interestingly, took these accounts more seriously than most Western governments. And here is where our story gets deeper. In 1958, 16 years after Unit 317 disappeared, the Soviet Academy of Sciences quietly established a commission specifically to investigate what they called the Almas question. The Almas was the Central Asian and Mongolian name for the same type of creature. The commission was led by Professor Boris Porshnev, one of the most respected zoologists in the Soviet Union. Porshnev was a serious scientist. He was not a sensationalist. And what he concluded, after years of fieldwork and testimony collection, was deeply unsettling to his colleagues. He believed the Almas was real. He believed it represented a surviving population of archaic hominids, possibly Neanderthal descendants or a related species, that had retreated into the most inaccessible mountain ranges of Central Asia. He presented his findings to the Academy. He was largely dismissed. His files, however, were not dismissed. They were archived. And they contained testimony after testimony from soldiers, shepherds, hunters, farmers, describing encounters that match, in remarkable detail, what Nikolai Belov described in his interrogation. There is also a physical evidence question. And I want to address it directly because this is where honest skepticism is important. No body has ever been recovered. No bones. No biological samples with verifiable DNA. Everything we have is testimony, footprints, and grainy photographs. That matters. It matters a lot. And I'm not going to tell you that Unit 317 was definitely attacked by a Yeti. I'm not going to tell you that. What I am going to tell you is this. 12 experienced soldiers entered a mountain range. 1 returned. The survivor's account was classified for 50 years. The Soviet military, not an institution known for excessive sentimentality, saw fit to suppress this story so thoroughly that the soldiers' families were told they had died in combat and were given no further information. And then, in the same mountain range, 60 years later, in 2013, a team of Italian mountaineers attempting an unclimbed ridge in the Wakhan corridor, the narrow strip of Afghanistan that borders Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan, reported finding an abandoned campsite at approximately 4,500 meters altitude. The campsite contained equipment they estimated was 60 to 70 years old. Soviet military equipment, partial tents, metal containers, a broken radio. They took photographs. They reported it to the Afghan authorities. Nothing was ever followed up officially. But the Italian team leader, a man named Marco Fenoglio, gave an interview to a mountaineering magazine in 2014. And in that interview, almost as an aside, he mentioned one thing about the campsite that he couldn't explain. The tent poles had been bent, outward, from the inside, as if something inside the tent had pushed outward with enormous force, as if the tent had exploded from within. I want to be careful here. I am not claiming this was Unit 317's camp. The coordinates don't quite match what we can reconstruct from Belov's testimony. It might be an entirely different mystery, or no mystery at all. But it feeds into a pattern that researchers have noticed across Soviet-era military records from Central Asia. Between 1939 and 1945, no fewer than 6 separate Soviet military units operating in the Hindu Kush, Pamir, and Tian Shan mountain ranges filed reports containing descriptions of large, unidentified bipedal creatures. Most of these reports were filed under the bureaucratic category of wildlife interference, a classification that would keep them out of mainstream intelligence review. In 3 of those 6 cases, men were reported missing under circumstances that could not be fully explained by combat, weather, or terrain. In one case, not Unit 317, a different unit operating in the Pamirs in 1944, the reporting officer wrote in a subsequent personal letter to his brother, "There are things in these mountains that the war has not frightened. That is the most frightening thing I have ever written." World War II created, among its many horrors, a massive and unprecedented movement of armed humans into places that had never before seen them. Soldiers from cities, from plains, from coastlines were suddenly deposited in jungles, deserts, Arctic tundra, and mountain ranges they had never imagined. And in some of those places, they found things they hadn't expected. The Pacific War generated its own strange catalog. Japanese soldiers describing encounters in New Guinea that defied explanation. American OSS operatives in the mountains of Burma filing reports about footprints 18 inches long. British Gurkha units in Nepal sending requests back to command asking, with characteristic understatement, for guidance on engagement protocols for large unidentified hostile fauna. The war, in a sense, inadvertently sent more human observers into more remote terrain than any period in history before or since. And some of those observers came back with stories. Most of those stories were buried. Because armies, even more than governments, run on the currency of morale. And nothing destroys morale faster than the idea that there is something out there that a rifle cannot stop. What happened to Unit 317? The honest answer is, we don't know. The official Soviet answer, filed in 1943 and never formally revised, is that the unit was destroyed by German forces and their remains were unrecoverable due to mountain conditions. Nikolai Belov's classified testimony says something very different. Porshnev's files provide context that makes that testimony harder to dismiss. And the long, strange tradition of large unidentified hominids in the Hindu Kush provides a framework, not a proof, but a framework for asking serious questions. I find myself thinking about Belov in that Novosibirsk apartment, working his factory job, refusing to look at windows at night, never talking about what he had seen, carrying that knowledge alone for 43 years. There's a particular loneliness in that, being the only person who knows what happened, knowing that if you spoke, no one would believe you, or worse, that the people who believed you would be the ones who made your silence permanent. He died in 1989, 2 years before the Soviet Union collapsed and the archive opened, 2 years before his testimony became public. He never knew. Whether he would have wanted to know, whether he would have wanted the world to finally hear what he had whispered into that crevice in the rock at 4,200 meters in the Hindu Kush, I genuinely cannot say. But I think about what he said in that interrogation room. The thing he said that no invented account, no fabricated story, would think to include. When the interrogator asked why the creature came back night after night, but never took him, after everything it had done, after everyone it had taken. Belov had no answer. He said only,
I don't know why it let me live. I have thought about it every day since. I don't know if it was mercy. I don't know if that word applies to what it was. But I think it wanted me to leave. I think it let me go so I could leave. And I have always wondered if it knew that no one would believe me. If it knew that was the safest thing it could do.
As always, I've put the sources and further reading in the description below. The Petrova Archive Transcript, Porshnev's original commission papers, and the Fenoglio Mountaineering interview are all linked. If you've made it this far, thank you. This channel exists because you keep watching, and these stories matter because you keep asking questions. Subscribe if you're new. There are more stories where this one came from. And if you're ever in the Hindu Kush, don't make camp near the high ridges. And for God's sake, don't move.